Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this closing session that I hope will continue on the preceding conversation. I am delighted to be chairing this panel in Germany, where we at the IISS have a very big office in Berlin in Breitzer Platz, because, of course, the issue of European security is of great interest to us. Please help me in welcoming our esteemed panelists. We are starting with the Prime Minister of Lithuania, Ingrida Šimonytė. Hello. The Vice President of the Council of Ministers and Foreign Minister of Italy, Antonio Tajani. Co-chairman of the SPD in Germany, Lars Klingbeil. And member of the French Parliament and spokesperson for Renaissance, Benjamin Haddad. I'd like to get right down to business. We are going to do 45 minutes of questions here, and then I'll open it up to the public. I'll start with a question to all panelists, and I'll start with you, Prime Minister. In your view, what should be the three goals of European strategic sovereignty?
Well, I think the major thing to start from is to understand what this sovereignty is from. And I think sometimes we hear the confusing messages, like, like European unity or European Union can sustain it on its own, being somehow sovereign from other democracies and other like-minded countries. So I think the understanding should be that this is supplementary or complementary to transatlantic unity. And I would say that given the world is not experiencing the excess of democratic countries at the moment, unfortunately. There is no potential and no rationale for democratic countries to do anything else but stick around the same ideas, because we share the same values. So this is the most important thing. Now, if we speak about the security and safety, then I would say that the transatlantic bond is something that is absolutely crucial, and we should not fool ourselves that this can be somehow done other way around. But Europe, for a very long period, has been behind the sort of realistic evaluation, investment, and preparation for a situation that is as bad as the war in Ukraine now. So I think the Zeitenwende that has been declared should be real. We should foot the words with the funds. We should send the right signals to the industry in Europe that would be able to match the funds. And we should build that other leg of transatlantic bridge as strong as it can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Foreign Minister.
Good morning, everybody. But there are, for me, 3 points: security, stability, growth. Security is to protect our borders, the East and the South, because there are also a lot of problems on immigration, illegal immigration. The situation in Tunisia in this moment is very dangerous. For this, we need to pay attention also in this sector. Security is also the stability of the Western Balkans, because we are close to this European region, and there are a lot of countries candidate as member of the European Union. For this, we need to work hard also in this sector. The stability, the security is also our engagement against the terrorism. ISIS and Daesh are not sleeping. ISIS is present in Iraq. Al-Qaeda is working hard in sub-Saharan region. In the Horn of Africa, there are also the terrorism. For this, we need to work also on this. The protection of the border on the west is also the strategy, an European strategy with the Americans, with the United Nations. We are two faces of the same coin, Europe and America. We need to work very well in NATO. Europe is the future for every member state. And for achieving this goal of the stronger union, I am in favor of federation as the United States of America, more or less. But we need the unity among the European Union. We need to be united, as we are united now, in defense of the rule of law, in defense of the human rights, in defense of the international law. For example, the invasion of Ukraine is an action against the international law. And we want the respect of the international law. This position is very clear for everybody. But we want to achieve peace. But it's impossible to achieve peace without justice. Justice is, I want to be very frank, independence of Ukraine and integrity of Ukraine. But also unity is crucial if we want to pave the way for a stronger Europe among NATO and Europe more present in Africa. Look at Africa. To look at Africa is crucial for the future. To leave Africa in Chinese hands is a big mistake for everybody here. Also for our growth. Italy with Germany are the most important industrial countries in Europe. In Italy, there are 4 million of small and medium-sized companies. For us, it's crucial to protect this network. But for doing it, we need to work hard against climate change, for better companies, to reduce the emissions of CO2, but we need also to work together with Europeans, but also with the Americans and with Japan, in one key point sector, raw materials, rare earth, are 2 key sectors for the defense of our companies. It's crucial for growth. And then we need to work all together. Unity, the 3 points are more or less different phases of the same problem, the same unity. Growth is also to work in space sector. It's very crucial, it's very important for everybody. Also, if you want a cleaner industry, we need to work with space. It's crucial, but we need to work together with the Americans, because for us, Europe is the first point for the Italian foreign policy, but the other key points are the transatlantic relations. We are part of this part of the world. It's impossible to change. I want to be very clear. Italy is with Europe, is with the United States of America, with NATO.
Thank you. Lars Klingbeil?
So, I mean, you asked for the 3 main key points from my perspective on European sovereignty, and I would say the first one is security and defense. And 2022 was a year where we all focused on our national security and national defense industry, and I think this year must be the year of European defense policy and European defense industry. And so we have to do more, we have to spend more money, we have to build capabilities, we have to focus on a European strategy, and we have to focus on some political points. Maybe we'll debate them later here also on the stage. The second point I see is the question of economic resilience. And I try to debate a lot with the friends from America about the question of Inflation Reduction Act here on the security conference, because I think there's a link between the question of security and the question of economic resilience. And we've seen in the pandemic, also in the war here in Germany, what's happening if we don't have this resilience. So on the one hand, we have to build structures that we are resilient in Europe, and on the other hand, we have to modernize our economy, carbon neutrality, climate neutrality, the question of clean tech, innovation policy, renewable energy. So there are so much areas where we should focus on as Europe. Digitization also, it's a big topic in Europe we should focus on if we want to become strong or stay strong in the field of economics. And this is for me the second pillar if we talk about European sovereignty. And the third one is that in my eyes, Europe has to become a much more geopolitical actor. This is in the European Union with the question of Balkans joining the European Union or Ukraine joining the European Union, but it's also the question of outside the European Union. For example, we talked a lot about strategic partnerships to countries in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, and I think it's so important that the European Union is becoming a strong actor in the field of strategic partnerships. And I mean, you ask for 3 pillars, and I'm a social democrat, so I have to add a 4th one, and this is the social dimension. We also have to talk always about the social dimension here in Europe. If we don't have good wages, if we don't have good jobs, if we don't have this social cohesion, it's a problem to take all the people in our countries for the European idea. But I see that the European momentum is there, and I think it's maybe the most important topic of my political generation to articulate and to debate and to form this strong Europe. But I think these are the main 4 pillars from my perspective. Thanks.
Thank you. Benjamin Haddad?
I think, first and foremost, simply put, it's about protecting the security and defending the interest of European citizens. Now, that seems like a completely obvious truism, but I think it does necessitate a change of mindset from European institutions, and especially the way we've built them. The European Union was first and foremost a peace project, an extraordinarily successful peace project on the European continent that managed to replace relations of conflict between states by relations built on law and economics and norms, but it didn't really prepare us to confront the rest of the world outside that still functions in zero-sum game, in conflictual relations, in great power competition. So it's giving European sovereignty, it's giving ourselves the tools to be able to defend our security by investing in cooperation on defense, building a defense industrial base. It's protecting our borders and having a common immigration policy, especially when we've been able to erase internal borders. That does mean that we need to be able to defend our borders. It needs understanding that trade, energy relationships have been weaponized by countries like China, like Russia, that use dependencies and interdependence that we have, and thus, investing in investment screening, in anti-coercion measures to protect each member and each individual of the European Union. It's a change of mindset that we're not just a vast NGO, but we're a political body with specific political interests, not global values to defend, specific European political interests, and we should invest in preserving them. And I'd say another word about this, preserving them alongside our allies, of course, our democratic allies, but also alone if necessary. And of course, the question of the transatlantic relationship is core on this issue. I think, especially after the year we've been through and Russian aggression on Ukraine, there's no question that NATO is the backbone of collective defense on the European continent. But that doesn't mean that Europeans should not give themselves the instruments and the tools to defend their security alone if necessary. If, for example, we have a regional crisis, I would say below the level of what would be considered an Article 5 issue for US policymakers left and right. If tomorrow we have a new crisis in the Western Balkans, if tomorrow we have a crisis in North Africa, I don't think you'd see much appetite in the American political body today to intervene on the behalf of Europeans, and rightly so. It would concern, first and foremost, European security. So it's about giving ourselves alongside NATO the ability to to defend our security, especially when we think about what might come next after 2024. That also makes us, I think, strong and good allies for our partners who are asking us to invest more in our own capabilities.
Great. Foreign Minister Tajani, you talked a lot about unity and the importance of unity. I'm going to open this question to everyone, and I'd like the Prime Minister to start. How do you achieve this European strategic sovereignty when, we heard it from the floor in the previous panel, there clearly is a lack of strategic trust or strategic empathy among member states of the EU?
Well, I think that sometimes maybe we more are hooked on this narrative that, you know, if not today, then tomorrow the unity will collapse. And I know the guy who is just waiting for this, you know, and maybe encouraging this discussion further and further every day. But from a practical point of view, when you look at the decision making, yeah, of course, it takes time. It's not perfect. Sometimes it's, you know, maybe looks even annoying to part of the countries that want to move fast. But at the end of the day, you know that we cannot allow ourselves to sort of sit and squabble if we are to remain as a union and as an idea. And we know that we should remain as a union and as an idea, and we are model for other people to sort of want to be part of. So we shouldn't sort of compromise the idea ourselves. I think sometimes this debate comes, or this lag comes because of different perspectives. Let's take the very long debate about what is Russia and what can Russia do. And for so many years we had this debate. We've been called sometimes names that were not very pleasant.
Warmongers?
No. This is one of the words, but maybe sometimes we were persuaded that it's our historical trauma speaking, and that this cannot be real, you know. So this is different than the stance of a warmonger, whatever that means. But when you just write it down to some emotional content, then of course it's a little bit hurting. Now, if anybody asks me, am I happy about us being right all along the way? Of course, we are the most unhappy, because if there is anything where we would have wished to be wrong, well, this is the idea. But this comes when people ask me why other countries have a different view. Because they have a different perspective, because they were constructing the welfare and the European idea since the end of Second World War, while we were just freshly independent again in 1990, and of course hungry and willing to be part of this European idea. So I think each and every time when we sit and sort of seem to be in a dead end, we must come back to what is the European idea and what is European Union. And it was mentioned, it is the biggest project of peace, first and foremost. And then it's based on values. It's not just based on, you know, on tiny, minor business interests. I will sell you this, you will sell me that, and we will keep blind on you doing something on the side. It's based on the values. And every time we come back to values, the debate seems to calibrate, because the values, because we know something countries like China, Russia, and others were trying to portray that this is not so, that first you can build economy, and then you can build human rights, private property, independent courts, free elections, and everything. We know that this is vice versa, that first you need to have those values, the human dignity in the core, and meaning the free court system, independent court system, free elections, free press, private property, and this is the core. This lets you create welfare and economic welfare for your people. So every time we come back to this, it seems like the debate gets back to normal.
But if I maybe may reformulate, how can you have a strategic sovereignty if you don't have the same strategic culture, if you don't have the same threat assessment in the middle of a war? How do you do that?
But we have, I think we have. Maybe there are some politicians or some debates in public that would sometimes be sort of portrayed as, oh, here it comes, here's the crack of Europe, here is no unity anymore. I do not really feel this. I think we are, maybe some of us were a little bit too optimistic of how soon this part of history will end. And we were trying to dissuade from being overly optimistic or overly sort of impatient. And what we are saying and what I am saying, we need to be patient. And patience is our strength. And trust is our strength. And if you cannot trust your friends, then whom can you trust? So you have no other option but to trust your friends.
Foreign Minister?
If you want to compete at global level today and tomorrow, we need Europe, we need to be united. As Italy, it's impossible to compete with China, with India, with Russia in the future, but also to be strong partner of the United States. It's possible to do it only if we are united. Europe is a project of peace, of course, but it is also a project, a good project for everybody. If you want to protect our citizens, if we want to help our citizens, we need to have an important umbrella. Europe is an important umbrella. There is a common identity. There are, of course, different identity. We are 27. We are different, but at the same time, we are very similar. A question. Beethoven is only a German mother tongue or is European? Dante Alighieri, the first pro-European in our history, is Italian or is European? The churches in Munich are German churches, Bavarian churches, or are European churches? The Roman Empire is only Italian or is an European heritage? España, la historia de España is in history, Spanish history is our history. This is important to understand. Every key point in every member state is also an important point for everybody in Europe.
But there's one you didn't mention, which is the history and the experience of the Eastern European countries and Baltics under the Soviet Union.
Exactly, but not easy to pave the way for a stronger unity. But we need to do it, working first of all on the most important point, security, as I said. We need an European defense if we want to be stronger among NATO. If we want to be a strong interlocutor of the United States, if we want to protect us, we need to spend more in defense in Europe, and to have an European defense. But we need also in European industrial policy. I worked hard on this for achieving this goal when I was commissioner. This is crucial. But we need also new rules, competition. There are old rules. We need new rules for our competition at global level. We need European champions if we want to compete with China, with India in the future. For this, we need to work more. But as I said, it's important to start with the most important point. To work on the not important point. We need more Europe on immigration, on defense, on foreign policy. Mrs. Rana worked very well in the beginning. Now, we need to implement his work. We need to strengthen his work. We need a real European foreign policy. For this, I think it's possible to do it, but we need to believe in Europe. I believe in Europe.
Thank you. Lars Klingbeil?
Yeah, I mean, I also believe in Europe, but from my perspective, now's the time to do more. And this European momentum, as I said before, is there, and we have to ask ourselves, what should we do now concrete? And I can repeat what I said in my first statement. I think now is the time to talk about European defense industry and European defense structures. And we have 27 national defense strategies on the national level, but we have to put it on the European level. So we have to see that we have the same standards. We have to look for work together in the armies. We have to formulate a common strategy. I mean, to be honest, the problem is that sometimes we don't have a common strategy in some states. In Germany, we're just working on the national security strategy. I do not know if we have a common strategy towards China in Europe. I'm very clear that decoupling is not the way, so we need to talk about diversification, de-risking. We need to define in Europe in which security areas we should let the Chinese out. I think it's not good if they are in our digital infrastructure, if they are in artificial intelligence, but I do not know if we have a common ground for that in Europe. I do not know if we have a common ground or perspective in Europe how to deal with our friends from the United States. So I think we have seen how important NATO is, and I thank God every day that Joe Biden is in the White House, especially in this historical moment we have with the war in Ukraine. But we do not know what will happen after the next election in the United States, and we do not know if there is such a good transatlantic friend in the White House. So that means we now have 2 years to start this European debate, and yeah, I think this is where we should focus on. And as I mentioned before, defense is one of the most important topics, and the time is starting now to do more. And very good that Emmanuel Macron put some proposals here on the table on this conference. Olaf Scholz put some proposals on the table, and so now we have to find a common strategy and a common way, but the time is ticking, and we don't have 2 years for this process. We maybe have half a year for this process. And then we talk about the question of industrial power and economic questions, and we don't have 3 years for that. We have maybe 1 year to have an answer to the Inflation Reduction Act, a self-confident answer to the Inflation Reduction Act. But also here, time is ticking.
Benjamin?
First, I want to say I share the optimistic tone of the Prime Minister. Look, we're a year into Russia's aggression on Ukraine, and we're united. And we managed to build a united European transatlantic response. The sanctions packages are holding, and no country is talking about withdrawing from them. We're still supporting Ukraine, still looking for ways to increase weapons deliveries, military support, and we're still focused. If you had asked anyone in this room on February 24th last year, exactly a year later, would we still be in that position? Would we still have the focus, the energy, the unity at the European and the transatlantic level to say we support Ukraine until victory? I'm not sure if we had polled, I'm not sure a majority of people would have said yes. I'm pretty sure, because I was very worried about this, I would have said no, building on previous experience. We've managed to diversify and shift from dependence on Russian oil and gas, which many experts said was completely impossible. Diversified suppliers. Our populations also have suffered and gone through many efforts to be able to limit their spending on energy. So, I think first we can be proud of what's been achieved, not complacent, and still need to hold in the long term. But I think we've proven we were united. However, of course, I agree with the underlying assessment of your question. There has been a problem of trust, empathy, and convergence of strategic cultures. I would say two things. I think, first, let's not underestimate that it's also a strength of the European Union. We're 27 countries with 27 histories, geographies, cultures, institutions, And I do think that's a strength, but it does necessitate empathy, listening, understanding where other countries come from, their geographies and history. And I speak from a country, France, that hasn't always been very good at this. For example, when it comes to Central Europe since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I think there's been a sort of a missed rendezvous, I would say, between us and Central Europe. That's changed in the last years, but I think it does, it is important to understand where we come from, and especially, same thing when you look at the Franco-German relationship, how important it is for us to maintain that tie because of our history. So we have different histories, and I think one of the reasons for Brexit was probably because the United Kingdom did not have the same relationship to its history, to the Second World War, and thus to the European project. So reading, listening, talking, I think in this respect is quite interesting, is quite important. And another aspect I would say is always keeping in mind that any organization, any collective organization is as strong as its weakest link. And so when China decides to isolate Lithuania and put economic pressure on Lithuania, it's a threat to the entire European community and European project. And this is why we have to be extraordinarily firm in protecting Lithuania and building anti-coercion mechanisms, precisely because when you probe, when an aggressive power probes, it always probes at where it sees it to be the weakest potential link. And so the entire edifice then becomes threatened. Same thing on migration. On migration, it's obvious that, once again, when you decide to have free circulation of people within the European Union, which is, I think, a tremendous success of the EU, then you understand that countries that are more exposed, like Italy, like Greece and others, to migration, need to be supported, protected by others, and you need to have internal solidarity among members to be able to support the whole edifice.
You just got a thumbs up from the Prime Minister. I don't know if you saw. Lars Klingbeil, you spoke about how we're so lucky that President Joe Biden is the president in the US, and who knows what's going to happen in the US in 2 years. So I'd like to go back to something that happened between Germany and the US in recent months, when Germany would not move on tank deliveries to Ukraine without basically strong arming the US into going ahead with it. Did that weaken the credibility of the Zeitenwende? I think back to former Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski, who has said before, we in Poland used to fear a Germany that was too strong militarily. Now we fear one that is too weak. How do you respond after that? Let's say, I don't want to call it a turning point, but it was a marking moment when Germany would not move without the US.
Sorry, the acoustic is not, the last sentence was?
Well, he said, we used to fear that Germany was too strong militarily, now we fear that it's too weak.
Yeah, I mean, I know this quotes, and you have to see what happened in Germany after the war started. I mean, it's the coalition with Olaf Scholz who put 100 billion to the army, and now we have a debate about spending more money to the army. We have a process where we sit together with the defense industry and try to have a common strategy for more capabilities and more producing. And I think Germany takes a leading role in the question of how to answer to this war. And this is on the field of military delivery, it's also on the field on sanctions, it's on the field of political pressure we put to Putin. And I think Olaf Scholz, when he was speaking here on Friday on this stage, he was totally clear about the German position. But in this special situation, when we had the decision if we would deliver tanks, it's absolutely important that Putin knows that the West is standing together and that everyone in the West is doing something, not just one country. And this was an important signal also for the people in Germany that if we go this way, and you have to know, not everyone is convinced in Germany, in the public, that this is the right step to deliver tanks. There are so many people that have fear of a third world war, that have fear about Europe is going to be attacked by Russians and all of this. And so we have to take the people with us. So Olaf Scholz is very clear. the government is very clear, the coalition is very clear on this question. We want to support Ukraine, but for Germany, and especially for the people in Germany, it's important that we took this step together with the United States and with other countries. And it was always very clear that there's no national way in this question. We need a way together with our partners, and so this was important, and that's the reason why there were the talks with the United States.
Benjamin Haddad, you said something about a missed rendezvous at some point with Central Europe. There seems to have also been a missed rendezvous at the beginning of this war by perhaps France and Germany when it came to putting in place very quickly strategic sovereignty in a situation, as you had said in your first remarks, where NATO wasn't the right response and Article 5 wasn't the response. Why did that happen?
What do you mean exactly about the missed rendezvous?
So France and Germany ceded the leadership in terms of the military response to this war in Europe to the US when this war could have been the time to show that they could lead on that level.
Yeah, look, first, once again, I think the biggest lesson is that the West has been united in supporting Ukraine, the United States, Europeans, and I don't think we should cherry pick or have a competition about who was first or who supported more. I think President Macron, from the start, has been very clear about the fact that we support Ukraine, that we give weapons. We had maybe a different way of communicating about weapons deliveries than other countries that were more explicit and open about it, but I think that has changed since then. And there was also, I'll talk about it very openly, I think a sense that you needed to keep a form of diplomatic connection with the Russian president. Of course, first before the war, where the president and Chancellor Scholz went to Moscow and Kiev to try to find a diplomatic exit, and I think that was a brave thing to do. Unfortunately, we have a Russian president that chose war and aggression, and that closed the door to diplomacy. And afterwards, to try to show the Russian president the folly of his endeavor and the fact that very early on, it certainly wasn't working as Vladimir Putin hoped and expected. But once again, I mean, it takes two to tango, and when you have a leader in Moscow that has clearly closed the door to any form of diplomacy and dialogue, there's absolutely no alternative to supporting Ukraine. Now, where I agree with you, I do think it is a test for European sovereignty and European defense and security. It is about showing to our partners, it's about first and foremost giving Ukrainians the means to defend themselves and free their country, but it is also for France and Germany about showing all partners in Central Europe that we stand by them. And so this is why you've seen also France invest more in forward presence of NATO. You've seen the French-led mission in Romania, increased presence in countries like Estonia, Lithuania, or Poland. I think all of this is really necessary and for us, important to keep in the long haul.
I turn now to I would like a quick short response to the three proposals that President Macron put on the table on Friday when it comes to sort of defense and security. He talked about, the first thing was, massive rearmament of Europe. The second was holding a conference on European air defense. And the third was reiterating the European dimension of France's nuclear deterrence and re-inviting European partners, as he had done in 2020, to engage in a conversation about nuclear deterrence in Europe. And I'm curious to hear if obviously this was put on the table on Friday, but what is your quick response to that? I'll start with the Prime Minister, perhaps.
Well, thanks. I don't think we had a good chance to discuss that in detail, but I think it's always must be seen in a broader context, because I cannot imagine the situation where Europe can completely rely on itself and forget about the other partners who are so crucial in our security situation and defense, and namely US and NATO as a bloc. So I think that from any person from my part of the world, you would most probably hear the positive attitude, although with a grain of salt, where we look what that means in a particular details. Because yes, air defense. I mean, we see the war in Ukraine, and of course we pay lots of attention to this episode from the 24th of February. But we must not forget that the war is going on for much longer than this year of this invasion that started last year. So we must see, and we see the weak points that we need to take into account. And of course, air defense is something that is also mentioned in NATO Madrid summit conclusions. So yep. It is important because when we speak about the weapons that delivered to Ukraine and the fact that the US is first in the ranks, there is no big surprise in this because, well, although each and every time we go through our stocks, we still find something we can deliver, and it would be better that we moved faster, but we all know that we need to replenish. We need not only to replenish, but we also need to expand. And for this, we also need industry capacities. And the industry is a little bit waiting on what the governments will do, because for industry to expand, they need to know that the announcement of billions and billions will transform to billions in the budgets. Because then you can move, you can expand, and you can provide the European countries with more or less weapons of the same standard that Lars was talking about, which I think is very important in case of, I mean, for the interoperability of our military. So interesting to hear. We'll participate in debate and see where that brings us.
Thank you. Foreign Minister.
But as I said, we need to spend more for the European defense. To spend more for the defense is possible also, is more or less to spend less at the national level, because we will coordinate the money, we will coordinate the budget on defense for a stronger European defense. It's possible to work all together for the same tanks, for the same plane. We need to work also at industrial level much better. This is a stronger European defense, and without a stronger European defense, it's impossible to have a stronger European foreign policy. We need to work hard in this direction. We need at industrial level, first of all, because this is crucial to work with the defense industry. But to have a strong defense policy is not to be in favor everywhere. It's to be in favor of peace, because if we protect well our borders, is to be in favor of peace. It's more or less the same situation in Ukraine. Why? We defend and we protect Ukraine because we want peace. Why? A defeat of Ukraine is not a solution for peace. If we want the peace, we need two interlocutors at the same round table, but Ukraine free. Because for this we send military heads. Italy approved 6 packages in this sector, but also in other different sectors, not only military sectors. To help in this moment Ukraine is to work for peace, because our goal is to achieve peace. We are not against peace. Italy is not in war against Russia. Italy is engaged in defense of the independence of Ukraine. For this, we need to spend in the future, to spend there better. More, it's also better at national level. Because today, the European defense system is only the beginning. We are working at the industrial level with a small group of soldiers, but we need to do more in the future. If we want, the defense is part of the foreign policy, and we need to do more on this. A proposal, you have spoken on the nuclear.
Yep.
Nuclear is a danger. Look at Iran. We need to pay attention. I have spoken with the General Director of the United Nations Agency on Iran, the situation. They are working hard in this sector, but if you want peace, we need to stop this. There is a danger in Ukraine now. My idea, our idea, is to have a free zone around Zaporizhzhia. Should be the first point for peace, to stop the battle around Zaporizhzhia, because Zaporizhzhia is very dangerous for everybody. The nuclear is, I am in favor of nuclear energy.
But on nuclear deterrence and the French nuclear deterrent in Europe and the role it could have, maybe.
We need a lot of time for this. France is nuclear, for France nuclear is normal, but on nuclear I want to start on energy before, then to the weapons. Nuclear is, we need a lot of time for doing nuclear weapons. I think now is important to, first of all, to protect Ukraine for achieving peace. I think I want to underline this point. We are in favor of Ukraine because we want peace.
Yep.
This is a clear point. We need to explain to the European public opinions. We want peace, and for this we are working in defense of the independence of Ukraine.
Thank you. Lars Klingbeil.
To the 3 points from the speech of Emmanuel Macron, I agree with the first point on more spending in military, but I have to say that we also need more spending in development aid. We have to have more spending in social policy in Europe. We have to spend more on industrial policy. We have to, so we need a strong Europe also in other areas. This is important for me to say. The second point I want to mention to this question is that it's not, I mean, we spend much more money on the national level, and I think on the European level, it's not just spending more money, it's also about interoperability, it's about standards, it's about coordination, it's about the same strategy, and it's not just more money. So, I mean, we need more money, but we also need the other things like strategy and all of this. Second point, air shield. And I mentioned before that I'm very thankful that Macron put his 6-point on the table here and these proposals, and this is very good for the strategic debate, and we need this debate in Europe now. And I mean, we know all about the debates in Germany and France, and I'm so happy that I think there's now this common will to go forward together. And Olaf Scholz also, when he gave his speech in Prague, presented some ideas about the question of air defense and the shield. And so I think now we have to look how we bring the concepts together and start the debate. But I cannot say I'm against Macron, I'm in favor of his ideas. I think we now have to start the talks and see how we bring this together. But the point for me is we have the security gap on air defense. We have it right now. We know what would happen if the Russians start missile attacks, for example, towards Germany. And so this is the reason why we have to start now. And if I understood right, if we take the Americans or the Israelis' ideas and materials, then we could go very fast. If we start now the European initiatives, it would take much more longer time. And so this is the question for me, could we bring the ideas for the short term to fill the gap we have now in security, and on the long term to build this European initiatives, could we bring these ideas together? And this is the debate for the next weeks. And on the question of nuclear deterrence, I don't fully agree, and I want to say that very openly. So I'm very happy that we have this transatlantic answer this answer here in Germany, together with our friends from the United States, on the question of nuclear questions and nuclear deterrence. And I have some questions to the French side. I mean, if I see how strong the position of the president in France is for a nuclear answer, for example, I didn't understand if Macron wants to share this power with the European partners or what his ideas are. And I think we also have to talk about these questions in the next months in the European strategic debates. But I think in Germany, we are very happy to have the transatlantic link in nuclear questions.
Benjamin Haddad, do you want to maybe clarify? Or?
Sure. Well, first maybe on the general gist of the speech calling for a rearmament that's both a material and also an intellectual rearmament of Europe. I think that's really key, and that should be a generational priority for all of us. I mean, it's a very well-known fact that if you accumulate every national European defense budget, you end up with the second after the US military budget in the world. Does that translate in actual operational capabilities and actual expeditionary capabilities? Of course not. So I think there is a need to better coordinate, to have more interoperability, to build common capabilities, and we've had progress recently on the Franco-German fighter, for example. So I think this is probably, I'm not a federalist. I think that, of course, defense will still be first and foremost a national sovereign competence, and I think that's actually a positive thing. But having more shared capabilities and the political will to use them, because sometimes we do have them, but we still hesitate over using them, I think is really key. On the question of the nuclear deterrent, I think it's clear that the French nuclear deterrent will stay a sovereign, independent deterrent. But if you look at the doctrine, the nuclear deterrent is there to protect French vital interest, and vital interest include also the security of allies and European partners. And we're such a far cry from the debates during the 60s with the United States. I think now over autonomous nuclear deterrence of European allies, especially France, which were one of the factors that led General de Gaulle in '66 to leave the NATO integrated military command that Nicolas Sarkozy joined back 15 years ago. Truth is now I think there's no doubt that having autonomous nuclear deterrence like the one of France contribute to the general security of the transatlantic alliance, alongside, of course, the US nuclear deterrent. And one word maybe on the question of the defense industrial base. Of course, the devil is in the detail, and that's something that we've been negotiating at the European level for years. I think it's really key, if we want to have the capabilities to defend ourselves as Europeans, to have a solid autonomous industrial base, interoperable with the ones of our allies like the United States, of course. But I'm a retired think tanker that went to politics. And you also need, if you increase defense spending, as we've been doing in France, over 10 years, 12 years, the defense budget of France will have doubled. 25% in the last 5 years, and then in the next budget is bringing us basically to double. And of course, that's even less than some of our key partners in Central Europe and elsewhere. If you want to be able to justify that, sell that to your public opinions, to your voters, you also need, I think, to show that it trickles down in terms of industry, in terms of jobs, in terms of growth for the population. I think it's very important. Defense spending, we all know, I think, here and in this room, how crucial it is to our security and our capabilities. But it's not the same kind of public expenditure as justice, health, or education that you use every day. You don't, if everything goes right, you don't need to use your military capabilities every day. But it's the life insurance of your nation. And so you better have it the day an unexpected crisis shows up.
I'd like to now move on a bit, maybe perhaps to the industrial side, and Europe's response to, let's start with the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. I'd love to hear, and perhaps Foreign Minister Tajani, you can start with that, given your previous experience as Commissioner for Industry. How does Europe respond properly to the IRA from the US without further distorting the free trade in the world, but also without siphoning off more investment that could help the green transitions of whether it's Africa, whether it's Asia. We've heard a lot about how important it is for Europe to also have empathy toward the global South, take into account their needs. How do you do that? And to quote Chancellor Scholz and President Macron, how do you de-risk without decoupling from the rest of the world and then allowing China to move into these spaces?
We need a conference for the answer. But I think the industrial policy is crucial for Europe. We want to compete on the quality at global level. The inflation is a problem for the Americans, is a problem for us. But the difference is very clear. The inflation in America is an internal inflation. In Europe, the inflation is coming from abroad. The problem for us is the situation in Ukraine. I think for the American companies, it's a good choice to back the industrial competition. In Europe, what is possible to do if you want to compete at global level, not only with the Americans? I think to have free state aid is not a good choice, because the freedom of state aids without limits is against the competition among the European Union. Is only to help one or two countries against the other countries. Probably we need to choose other solutions. To have only one in European industrial policy. My idea is to have another recovery plan for putting more European money among the European Union. If we want to compete at global level as Europe, we need to have different choices, not only the total freedom of the state aids. Because the richest countries will be more money for the competition, and the other countries less money for the competition. This is not a good choice for the competition, because competition is one of the most important key points among the European Union. I want to compete at global level, of course, but I want to compete as Italian industry at internal level, at European level. For this, I think it's better to have an European fund for helping and for supporting at global level the European industries.
Lars Klingbeil, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think we are together in the analysis that the Inflation Reduction Act is a big challenge for Europe, and but I have to underline that I'm very happy that the Americans do this climate policy. I think it's important for the world that they start now with an active climate policy and try to get the carbon neutrality and all of this. And so now we have to formulate our answer, and as I said before, it must be a self-confident answer. We have strategic decisions focusing on industry policy. We have to reform the state aid. Yes, we have to find some money also for invest. We have to see if Next Gen EU, I think there are some money left we can maybe take for this. We can also have an open debate, and I say this, I underline, as a party leader, not as member of the government. As Social Democrats in Germany, we are open for a debate about finance resources and find them for the European investments. But we have to take the decisions now, and then we have to sit together with the Americans and talk, because I think at the end it must be a transatlantic agenda on industry policy. And this is what we have to make crystal clear to our American friends. It's not okay if we take more responsibility on security, and we will do that. We talked about this in the last hour. It's not okay if we as Europeans take another politic towards China, and this is also an economic risk for Europe. But then the Americans' friends coming and make an industry policy that's not meant against us, but that's in some ways against us. And it's a big challenge for Europe. So we have to talk about common trade agreements, about the instruments in the Inflation Reduction Act and on the European side. So for me, it's important that there's no battle between the United States and Europe, but for that we have to go a common way. And the first thing is that we have to find a European answer. But to me, it seems after the last European Council that we're on a good way. There are proposals on the table from Ursula von der Leyen and from others. And yes, it's about state aid, it's about strategic dimension, it's about investments, it's about European money, and I think this must be the solution in the next months.
Benjamin Haddad, you wanted to add something quickly?
Three quick points, because I strongly agree with what you just said. First, I do think the proposals that were put on the table recently by President von der Leyen go in the right direction. We need massive investment for the green transition. And if it comes with some state aid, if it comes with rethinking some of the competition policy that sometimes has gone against our own industrial and economic interests, then let's have no taboo, and let's not be naive also about what some of our partners are doing in terms of protectionism. Second point, it is still important, while protecting our own economic interests, to have this robust transatlantic dialogue. And while I really applaud the amazing job the Biden administration has done in coordinating a transatlantic response to Russian aggression on Ukraine, I think it's been less impressive when it comes to having this economic dialogue, especially when it comes to the Chinese challenge, which is ironic because it was the priority when the Biden administration came into power. President Biden's first trip was to Brussels. We set up the TTC, the Transatlantic Tech and Trade Dialogue, and at the time the understanding was if you want to build a common response to China, it's not going to be primarily a military one. It's the question that's being asked is what kind of globalization, what kind of rules and norms do we want on supply chains, on investment, on digital norms? And in this, need to engage in the dialogue with the EU, with Brussels, with the Commission and its normative instruments. And I think maybe because it's been hijacked by the war in Ukraine, we haven't been able, I think, to have this robust conversation. And the third point is at the European level, I think we need to have a frank conversation about energy policy and energy prices. The way the energy market currently is set up tends to inflate prices artificially, which also goes against our own economic and industrial interests. It's a complex debate, but the way prices are set up is determined by the latest producing unit, which tends to be a gas plant. And when you have a higher mix of renewables or nuclear in your energy mix, you still have a higher share, you still have very high prices. And so I think having it's a complicated and also debate where you have lots of different national interests, but we need to have a serious conversation about the way this is fixated.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up now to the public, and the first question will go to our Munich young leader, Nereo Peñalver.
Thank you very much. Today we're suffering the consequences of a policy over decades in which we decoupled our sources of prosperity from our sources of security. This created some dependencies. These dependencies are being weaponized today. You discussed that part of the solution is diversification of our energy sources, of our supply chains. Should we discuss also the role that new technologies can have in our manufacturing processes? For instance, how can 3D printing technologies help us shorten our supply chains? Thank you.
Prime Minister, you want to take that?
Yeah, I might start. Definitely yes, because the question is, there was a mentioning of the high inflation that is imported in the case of European Union. Yes, we know it is imported, but then the question is what we do about it. Shall we sit and wait until the situation sorts out somehow and then again come to Moscow and ask, can you offer us some cheap gas now on some other conditions? So of course this is not the way we should proceed. I mean, this transition that we have to go through here is meant to happen from the sort of starting point that there is no point of return here. So we need to completely reshuffle and rearrange our energy system, where this can play a very significant role, and we should think about new generation energy systems, about new technologies, green technologies, hydrogen, whatever, that is part of the grid. And here is this European sovereignty very high on the agenda, because when we speak about IRA, it sometimes looks like, we want to have 2 for 2. Yeah. If there is IRA, let's make our own IRA. But this is a sort of a wrong assumption. Let's do our homework. We know our problems. Many of them should be sorted out at European level. We will need European funds for that, and very, very strong cooperation also at industrial level, at the level of investments, into country investment grids and everything whatnot. So this is where the place for these technologies is very, very visible, and I think this is how we should see it for the future.
Lars Klingbeil?
I totally agree that we should focus on new technologies and digitization and all these questions. I mean, especially in Germany, we paid a high price for the dependencies we had towards Russia and the Russian gas, and we did mistakes, yes, you're right. And so that means now we must learn for the future. And as I mentioned before, I think there are some areas where we should let the Chinese out, artificial intelligence, all of this. And I mean, I do not know who's doing something on the question of industrial metaverse, for example. So this is so important for European industries, that we are good on the question of industrial metaverse, that we are good on the question on AI, that we are good on all these developments that are there, and also good on the question of new energy developments. And if we see the funds we had with Next Gen EU, so I mean, they were focusing on all this question of modernization. So it's in economy, it's a question of resilience, but it's also the question of modernization, to have a strong Europe and to create the future jobs here on this continent. And so I totally agree that we should focus on, but I think it's on the economic agenda of the European Union and all of the debates that are on the European level.
Thank you. We have a question here from the MP from Ukraine, please.
Lisa Yasko, member of Ukraine Parliament. Dear colleagues, friends, when we talk about the future of Europe as sovereignty, we should ask ourselves what were the reasons why we got to the situation as a year ago. And one of the reasons is actually the influence of Russian propaganda and disinformation. And we didn't talk about this here, but I'm also a reporter on the situation in France, on the human rights situation on behalf of the Council of Europe, and I know how disinformation and influence on the media and the politics is a big problem in France and in other countries that you represent. But now specifically, I want to ask our Italian friend, on behalf of thousands of Ukrainians who are very much concerned that while all the member states banned Russian media, in Italy, somehow, Russian media is still working. This is different requests that I get from Ukrainians, but also personally, I was recently in Italy, and in the hotels where I was staying, I saw Russian media everywhere. Why is it so? Can we change that, please?
Foreign Minister.
But for the Italians to understand Russian is not easy. Also to understand English for the large part of Italians that speaks Italian for this. But I think Russian propaganda is working through the social network more than the newspaper. Today, the information is through the social network. For this, we are implementing the decision of the European Union on the copyright, because through the copyright it's possible to check, and because to check the situation, to have a defense of the right information. This is crucial. The intellectual, but a large, I think, there is not a Russian, frankly speaking, not a Russian propaganda. Of course, there are the journalists working in Russia, but I think that the large part, the 99% of the Italians are in favor of Ukraine. It's not, I think, for me, Russian propaganda doesn't exist in my country. It's not a problem. There are a lot of Italians here.
I guess the question is, why allow Russian televisions to continue to be available in Italy, to be watched in Italy, given that, you know, whether it's RT or Sputnik, etc.
There's not a problem for nobody watching the Russian television. I think in Italy, look, Italy is completely different. We are not close to Russia. Nobody is watching Russian television, Russian newspaper. This is not a problem for us. No, but your opinion, of course, I respect your opinion, but please respect my opinion, because it doesn't exist, this problem in Italy. The Russian propaganda is out. It's completely out, doesn't exist. Nobody knows the Russian newspaper. I think nobody in Italy watch the Russian television. It's missing. There is the country with the stronger action against oligarchs, the stronger action by Guardia di Finanza. I want to be very clear on this. Nobody in Europe is doing what Guardia di Finanza is doing against these Russians. Our action is very, very, very strong. This is not Russian propaganda.
Thank you. I have two requests from the panel to also respond to that question. Prime Minister.
If I may, I think one important thing to mention here is that for so many years, so many people in Europe, politicians, also other observers, were blind to see that what actually happens is that Russia takes all the values that we cherish so much, like independent courts, like welfare state, like freedom of speech, like free elections, and participate in all of this for the abuse of, for their own benefit. So they are now using our court system to challenge the sanctions, because we have independent courts and they might use their chances. They were using our education, healthcare, all the systems for their wives, kids, mistresses, and mothers-in-laws. And then they were registering property in Europe because they knew it is safe. And they were also betting and speculating on this freedom of speech, saying that, look, if you tolerate all the opinions, then you need to tolerate also this opinion. But I mean, it's a right time to say that there is no media. Even you in your question said media. It's not media. It's just propaganda. And as soon as we understand that there is no media, just propaganda, so we will feel much braver to put ban on all the channels that we can control. Thanks.
Benjamin Haddad.
I was going to say the same thing. Information space is comparable to the conversation we've just had about trade, about energy relationships. It's authoritarian regimes using our openness, free markets, our democratic values as a weapon. They're weaponizing it as tools of leverage and influence. When we close Russia Today and Sputnik in Europe, we don't restrict freedom of speech. We actually push back against state weapons that are used by an authoritarian state to restrict our own independence and sovereignty. And that's, I think, a nuance that's very important. I agree with Foreign Minister Tajani that one of the biggest battle spaces is going to be social media. And everything that we're doing at the European level, Digital Service Act, etc., is precisely to be able to at least have a sense of fighting against hate speech, fighting against disinformation on social media. And it's very important here to try to have a conversation with our American friends about the different kind of norms and regulation you can see. And just one last point on this. We're talking about the internal challenges of our own democracies, but Europe, and I think that's one of the things that we've awakened to in last year, has also failed to compete in terms of influence with Russia and even China in our own neighborhood. When you look at the Western Balkans, I'll take just one example, vaccine policy, vaccine distribution. I think it's been a great success of the European Union at the level of the 27, but when you go to Serbia or Bosnia in 2021, it's Chinese vaccines that have been distributed. They're on our continent. And same thing when you go to Moldova, Georgia. So it's not only about disinformation and propaganda, it's also that on actual policies, even in our own neighborhood, we failed to compete against authoritarian regime in the last decades.
Thank you. We have a question here from the gentleman in the glasses, fourth row. If someone can get him a mic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very much for enlargement, not to be misunderstood. The Western Balkan countries, Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova. A lot of reasons I have not to argue. It was said enough about that in the course of the last 3 days. But we will be then 36 member states. Are we prepared for that with our decision-making procedures? The efficiency of our decision-making? I believe not, as we see every day. The history of the European Union, we had in the 80s Eurosclerosis and nothing went. Then it became, in the 80s, the single market, in creating the single market by inventing majority voting. There would be no single market without majority voting. And the same was the procedures then in the 90s. Monetary Union, Amsterdam, Nice, Lisbon. It was all the way to prepare for the enlargements around 2004, to make the European Union able in competences, but especially in decision-making. Now we talk about 36 member countries, but not about a reform of the European Union. We ask all the candidate countries to reform, but nobody asks, we do not ask ourselves to reform ourselves to be able for enlargement.
Thank you. I'm going to pool some questions. There's a gentleman right there, and then the lady in the second row, just so that we can end on time and I can, Ambassador Huysken can give the closing remarks. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. It's Ulrich Lechte, spokesperson of the Liberal Party in the German Bundestag. I just want to raise the question, and being the Advocatus Diaboli, what happens if the US have to focus on the Pacific conflict? What happens when all the production we are just seeking to get from the US is not coming to Europe? What's about our defense industry? Are we able to raise the production lines there? Are we able to come by with projects like FCAS, don't thinking about where to produce it, then how to produce it, and come by to raise our own defense industry? That would be quite a question I would like to hear answered by all of the panelists, please.
Thank you. And the lady in the second row, please.
Thank you. Zanda Kalman Jelkoševica, Deputy Speaker of the Latvian Parliament. And first of all, thank you for the great discussion. And as we are discussing security of Europe and strategic autonomy of Europe, I would like to ask the distinguished panel, would you agree to the statement that we cannot imagine anymore the European Union whole, free, and in peace without Ukraine as its member, and that we should speed up accession of Ukraine to the European Union, not only because of the will of the Ukraine and our moral duty towards Ukrainian people, but because it's in the interest of Europe itself. And we cannot indeed be whole, free, and peace anymore without Ukraine as part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask our panelists to please respond briefly. So 3 questions, you answer whichever one you prefer. Enlargement, reform of EU, US focus on the Pacific, and so no longer able to pull the weight it has so far, and then speeding up Ukraine's accession. Perhaps, Prime Minister, you want to start?
Well, I will speak most probably about the last question, no surprise, but then I will try to mention a couple of things about the others. As you know, Lithuania was, same as Latvia, among the countries who were supportive for Ukraine accession towards in the EU before it was cool. I mean, for ages, forever. And the calculation in this, if I might use this word because it's a little bit downgrading, but the rationale behind this is that basically with Russia as it is, and with autocrats becoming stronger and more cooperative among themselves, it is delusional to think about the areas of nobodies. Like sometimes people were saying, you know, to me in some private or even political conversations, why don't you let something be a buffer zone? And then I'm saying, you know, somebody might want me for a buffer zone, but I mean, as a nation, I want to be able to make choices. And we have our choice, and our choice is pro-European. And I think same holds true for Ukraine as well. Because for Europe, it is a geopolitical issue to have the region of Ukraine, Moldova, also countries like Georgia and Balkans definitely, in line with the values that we share. Because this is not about, you know, exerting some colonialistic idea like Russia does. It's on the contrary, it's based on the same understanding of peace and prosperity. So I think absolutely yes. And it is not because now Ukraine is fighting and paying human life toll every day for the European idea, basically. But this is because even from years behind, it had significant rationale for European Union to embrace Ukraine, Balkans, and other countries that otherwise might dip into something which is not in our interest. Now, coming to the question about the United States and the risk that the United States will not have time for us, so to say, I think that it is extremely important what we are doing now with our position against and our stance against Russia. Because same like we learn from each other, same like we cooperate, autocrats unfortunately also learn from each other and from each other's lessons and do things or do not do things because there are lessons to learn from. So I think we, first and foremost, we need to stick to our line as long as it is needed. And, but what I think is also important, speaking about us as countries from NATO world, is that North Atlantic security is becoming more and more inseparable from Indo-Pacific. So the potential for cooperation among the democracies in this region is also very strong.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and thank you for keeping it short. Foreign Minister.
On enlargement, yes, we need to work hard for the enlargement in the Western Balkans. There are a lot of countries candidate. Italy has been in favor of the candidacy of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We need to do more. Also, we need to work for supporting, as Elmar Brok said, to support this country for reforms. We need to work hard in this direction also with Ukraine. Ukraine is a country candidate to be member of the European Union. We want to work with Ukraine also for the reconstruction of Ukraine after the end of this war. On the defense, we need to do more in Europe. We need an European defense. The European defense is to spend more for the European defense and less at the national level, because the coordination is a good solution also for everybody. We need to have also a stronger defense industry in Europe for a better coordination between the different countries in every sector. At technological level also, we need to work more in cybersecurity. Also, this is crucial, innovation and research, but cybersecurity is a key point in this moment, because we are under attack, cyber attack, everywhere, every day. This is very important. On the United States, it's impossible to be alone. We need the net umbrella for the defense of our countries, of our Europe, with a strong link between Europe and America. But we need to pay attention also in the Indo-Pacific region. We need to work also with Japan, Australia, New Zealand, under NATO umbrella. For this is crucial. The cooperation, I started with this position. For Italy, there are two key points: Europe and transatlantic relations. And also on defense policy, we need to do it.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Lars Klingbeil.
Okay, the first question of Ukraine joining European Union. Yes, we are very clear about that in German politics. I think European level is clear. Olaf Scholz is clear about that. I think I was one of the first Social Democrats asking for this in public, and but there are criteria. So, I mean, Ukraine has to fulfill the criteria, but we can make this a political process, and I think it's important also as a signal towards Ukraine. About the enlargement and the question of Elmar Brok, I think it's not the question if we want enlargement. I think if we see Europe as a geopolitical actor, we need enlargement, and we need it very fast. And we have to be absolutely clear on that. Otherwise, and my French colleague told it, all these countries will seek the connections towards China, Russia, and all of this. So if we want Europe to stay strong, we need enlargement. But that does not mean that we do not need also reforms. I mean, I'm absolutely in favor of more majority votings, and I'm absolutely in favor of reforms in the European Union to have this as a political actor. But the question of enlargement is a high political question, and we should be very clear on that. And the last question about Europe and US and our friendship, I mean, I'm also absolutely clear that the Americans will focus more in the Indo-Pacific region. And this is the reason why we should do more. And I think this is a signal here from Olaf Scholz, from Macron, on the talks I had on this Munich Security Conference. Everyone was very clear that Europe has to do more military spending, more structures on defense industry on the European level, more strategy debates and strategy decisions on the European level. I don't think that the Americans will make this hard cut after the next election. So we are very happy to have them on our side, but they will make a lot more pressure that we do more. And to me, it seems on this conference that Europe is ready for that, and now we have to fulfill.
Thank you. I'm going to borrow 2 minutes from Ambassador Huysken's time and give it to Benjamin Haddad for the final word.
Yeah, I'm feeling the heat. Quickly on enlargement in Ukraine. Yes, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, the Western Balkans are destined to join the European Union, a part of the European family. But yes, Elmar, this will mean, I think, strong reform, internal reform of the European Union, a more agile decision-making process. And also, let's be lucid, honest, and frank with our partners. It will take time. It's both a political and a technical process. It does mean administrative reforms, rule of law, internal fight against corruption. There's a lot. It will take years, but that doesn't mean it's an either out. And I think this is why President Macron has been pushing the European political community as a for, not as an alternative, but as a for in the meantime to engage our neighborhood on a lot of concrete projects to keep them anchored to the European Union. And on the question of the United States, yes, I think it's a clear risk. And I mean, this is one of the reasons why we've been discussing European sovereignty. There is a risk, and it's a risk that American policymakers have been warning us about, that the US shifts to Asia or even shifts to being more inward-looking. And this is why I think we have to invest in European sovereignty. But I would say just one last thing. I think it's also a way to salvage the transatlantic relationship, to shift it to something more mature, more balanced. The best way to keep the transatlantic relationship alive and the United States anchored to the European continent is not to show that we're weak or that we have no value added. On the contrary, is to show that we're a strong, able partner that it can act on its own and that adds value added to the relationship.
Thank you, and thank you for those closing remarks. Please join me in thanking our panelists, and go ahead.